Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to this webinar on gender in the UN system, part 5 of our series on gender equality and future chemicals management. I'm happy to see you here today. My name is Mino Hemati and I'm happily facilitating the session for you. I'm an associate with MSP Institute, the organizer of this webinar. MSP Institute is a small charitable association based in Berlin, Germany, dedicated to supporting high quality dialogue and collaboration among stakeholders, stakeholder participation, and good governance. We've been working on gender and chemicals since 2017 with support from the German Federal Environment Ministry, and have been active in the SAICM process since then. Anna Holthaus is coordinating our work on gender and chemicals. I'm a co-founder and associate advising the project, and I also welcome Pia Zimanda today. She's our intern supporting the gender and chemicals work. Hello and welcome to the team. So this is our, if you go to the next slide, please. So as I said, this is our 5th webinar in a series. We invite you once a month to join us for 45 minutes on gender equality and its interconnections with the world of chemicals. Every last Tuesday at 2 p.m. CEST, there are opportunities to learn from experts, policymakers, and practitioners, and to discuss how we can create a gender-responsive future framework for the sound management of chemicals and waste. The recordings of webinars 1 and 2 can be found online at our homepage. And I see that I'm not sure if we're seeing the presentation right now. No, we're not, but we're getting there. So it's about screen sharing, and there we go. If you go to exactly full screen and then to the next slide, that's great. Thank you so much. There we are. So webinars 1 and 2, the recordings are online on our homepage. And for webinar 3, we have a slideshow that can be found at YouTube. You just go to genderchemicals.org and you find the links. Webinar 4, yes, it comes after webinar 5. You know, time is relative. Well, we had to move it. So webinar 5 is coming up next week on the 2nd of December on gender and green and sustainable chemistry, with speakers from the International Sustainable Chemistry Collaborative Center and the German Federal Environment Ministry. And then there's another one close to Christmas on the 22nd of December on gender and SAICM beyond 2020 with Brenda Kuckuck from the SAICM Secretariat and Julia Carlini from SEAL. We'll probably continue our series next year, and there's a number of people and topics lined up, but we also love to hear from you. So let us know if you're interested in sharing a presentation on issues relating to gender and chemicals, and we see how we can maybe integrate that in our webinar series. The webinars are brief to avoid overload, as we just discussed, so we've created some quick and dirty sessions focused on one particular issue each, and they're being recorded. So I'm telling you now that we're recording the session and that we will be making it available on our website again. Our agenda for today, if you go to the next slide, is very simple. We'll have a brief introduction on gender in the UN system by my colleague Anna Holthaus, and then the main presentation on gender in the BRS conventions by Susan Wingfield. Welcome, Susan. We'll introduce you properly in a little while. We're very happy that you could join us today. We'll take those 2 presentations and then open for questions and comments. And we'll be using the chat function, and you can also raise your virtual hand here in Zoom. Just in case you don't know yet, at the bottom of your Zoom window, you find 2 icons that are relevant. One is participants and one is chat. When you click on the participants list, you can raise your virtual hand. And when you click on the chat function, you can see the chat and people are already using it, and you can use it throughout. If you do have a technical problem, please use the chat and we'll try to help. If your connection isn't good, try switching off your video, but if you can, leave it on so we can see each other and see ourselves as a community. Thank you so much. That's by way of intro from my side, and I hand over to Anna.
Yeah, can you switch? Yeah, perfect. So thank you, Mino, and also welcome from my side. Before we begin with the presentation of our guest speaker, Susan, I want to introduce you very briefly to our topic today, which is gender in the United Nations system. And firstly, I want to invite you to do a very brief poll with me. And I hope this is working now. So the first question to you is, what do you think, how many gender-specific indicators are used across the Sustainable Development Goals? 5, 17, or 54? And I hope you can see the question and response options on your screen. Yes, and some people are already answering it. Then the second question to you is, when do you think was the connection between gender and environment first defined in the United Nations? Was it 25 years ago, 10 years ago, or never? And the last question to you is, what do you guess was the percentage of women on government delegations at the last BRS COP in 2019? Was it 32%, 44%, or 56%? So please make your decisions. Okay, I will wait a bit. See, more than half of you have already voted, but take your time. So make your final decisions and then
Not surprising. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so 5 last seconds and then I will stop the poll. Yes, so I will share the results with you. So most of you think that there are 17 gender-specific indicators in the SDG framework, and that's not right. We can be very happy that we are. The right answer is 54. Sorry. Gender-specific indicators are used across the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think it's getting more in the next years. To the second question, you have guessed that 10 years ago, the connection between gender and environment was first defined in the United Nations, but it was already defined 25 years ago. And we still have to work on that. And on the last question, you thought, or you guessed that 32% of the government delegations were women at the last BRS COP, but that's not right. We can be happy that there are 44% were women at the last BRS COP, and that's a big step forward, I would say, because in contrary to the COP in 2017, this COP in 2017 had a women percentage of only 35% of women. Yeah. So thank you very much, and let me start with gender equality in the United Nations. And please, Pia, go to the next slide. I think maybe it takes a minute. It's not working. Maybe, yeah, you start the presentation again and then.
This is going to take a sec. Not a problem. Okay, I think it's coming. There perfect. It is.
Okay, thank you, Pia. And so let me start with gender equality in the United Nations. And as you might know, I think gender equality is at first a human rights issue and a huge issue of political participation, because women are still underrepresented at all levels of political leadership. But gender equality, and I really cannot say this too often, is also a precondition and indicator for sustainable development. And this simply means that there is no sustainable development without gender equality. And that's why gender equality is an independent goal, SDG 5 in the Agenda 2030, and it is also integrated as a cross-cutting task in the other SDGs. And you already know now with 54 gender-specific indicators. And to learn more about the interconnections of gender in the Agenda 2030, I really very much recommend you to have a look at the UN Women Report from 2018, which you can see on the slide, Turning Promises into Action, and I will send you the link in the chat box later. The term gender equality itself refers to the equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities of women and men, and implies that the interests, needs, and priorities of both are taken into consideration. And the preferred terminology within the United Nations is indeed gender equality, rather than the very similar term gender equity. Okay, Pia, next slide. Perfect. The strategy for promoting gender equality is gender mainstreaming, and I think most of you know. Since 1919, there has been a growing debate about gender mainstreaming strategies in the United Nations, and gender mainstreaming was then endorsed in the Beijing Platform for Action and agreed at the United Nations 4th World Conference on Women in 1995. And then gender mainstreaming was finally defined in the ECOSOC agreed conclusion 1997 as a strategy for making women's as well as men's concerns and experiences an integral dimension of policies and programs in all political, economic, and societal spheres so that women and men benefit equally. And especially, the Beijing Platform for Action made comprehensive commitments in 12 critical areas of concern. And in Chapter K, Women and the Environment, the Beijing Platform comprehensively defines the interlinkages between women and men, between women and the environment. And the Beijing Platform defines with that the interlinkages between women and environmental policy, which was for the very first time, so it was a novelty in international policy. And in the consequence, environmental policy was, and of course is still, encouraged to integrate gender mainstreaming. And by the way, this year is the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration, and it is still the most progressive blueprint ever for advancing women's rights. And that's the reason why 2020 isn't only the super year for nature, but it's also a super year for gender equality, and next year because of COVID-19 too. And that's why UN Women started the global campaign Generation Equality, which you might already have seen in social media or UN events. Okay, next slide, please. So the question now is, how is gender mainstreamed in environmental policy fields? And therefore, let's have a quick look at the two biggest multilateral environmental agreements, the Climate Change and Biodiversity Conventions, before Susan is then going deeper into the BRS conventions. In both conventions, the UNFCCC and the CBD Convention have agreed on various cross-cutting gender activities in their gender action plans. In each secretariat, there are one or more staff positions for gender. And since the last years, gender is also integrated more and more at the national level via national focal points, for example, or via gender-responsive national action plans. Additionally, events and activities were done for decision makers, like capacity building workshop for delegates, and sometimes this is done together with UN Women. A gender day with a lot of different events and dialogues is held at every climate change COP, and various publications like, for example, 5 gender fact sheets on the interlinkages of gender and biodiversity were published at the CBD website. And in negotiations of both conventions, women's organizations and gender experts are actively involved and recognized as a stakeholder group. And of course, they are also very well networked with each other. And some of them also, of course, follow our CICEM negotiations. If you are interested in more information on the interlinkages, publications, and gender activities of these two MEAs, I really recommend you to visit their special web pages on gender, and you'll see the links on the slide here, and to also have a look into their gender action plans. Yep. So I hope my brief introduction gives you a first insight, but with Susan, we have an expert here, and that's why I hand over to Mino again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna, for giving this very brief overview and also surprising us a little with the questions in the poll earlier. I didn't know there were 54 indicators across the SDG system. Very cool and good to see. So welcome again to Susan Wingfield. Susan is a program management officer in the governance branch of the Secretariat of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, located in Geneva. Among her responsibilities is the facilitation of 2 partnerships under the convention on plastic waste and on household waste, and coordination of the work of one of the convention's subsidiary bodies. And Susan also acts as the gender focal point for BRS, so she's right in the middle of things and mainstreaming gender in these conventions, and we'll talk about how that works in the BRS. Susan, we're very happy to have you here with us today. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Minu and Anna. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much to MSP Institute for inviting me to speak today. It's lovely to have the opportunity to share the work that we've been doing on gender within the BRS conventions. Now comes the technical challenge, which is where I attempt to share my presentation. Let's see. Is that visible?
Yeah, perfect.
Amazing. Thank you. Right. So it's great that Anna has already given an excellent introduction to gender in the UN system. So I don't need to go into the various initiatives and declarations and so forth that have already preceded this point. I can really just dive straight into the topic of my presentation, which is gender and the conventions. Let me see, here we go. So I think we have many participants here who are already in the chemicals field, so you'll most likely be quite familiar with the 3 multilateral environmental agreements on chemicals and waste. Those are the Basel Convention, which is the agreement on hazardous and other waste, Rotterdam Convention on the prior informed consent procedure for certain hazardous chemicals, and then of course Stockholm, the youngest convention, which is on persistent organic pollutants. And these conventions were brought together, gosh, it's some years ago now, I think about 8 years ago. We used to be 3 separate secretariats now, and then we joined together as one happy family. Just to note, the 3 conventions are still legally autonomous, but they're all served by the one secretariat, and I am very lucky to be gender focal point for the 3, or the one big secretariat. I noticed from the participants list actually that my colleague Amelie is here, which is great. So Amelie, at any time, if you feel like you want to jump in and add anything, please do so. That would be most welcomed. So just to go back to the start of the gender work within the Secretariat, really it started when we came together as the one Secretariat, and the Executive Secretary at the time really saw the need to raise the issue of gender to a higher prominence within the chemicals and waste agenda, and was quite a pioneer in that aspect. And really, he set up a gender task force, of which Amelie and I are currently members, and entrusted us to develop a gender action plan for the Secretariat. So this was quite a daunting task to start off with, but we, through a lot of consultation with parties and discussion in both internally and externally, we narrowed the focus of the action plan into 3 main areas, which was, first of all, we needed to look at gender mainstreaming within the Secretariat, which, as you can imagine, involved making sure that staff were aware of the issue, how gender would be mainstreamed, definitions, and as already touched upon, you know, differences between terminology, gender equality, gender equity, there's quite a lot of linguistic challenges associated with gender. So to really bring staff to awareness of those different terms, but also to look at really the balance of work life within the Secretariat, the gender balance across all of the different grades and levels of seniority within the Secretariat. So that was really the first area of focus. The second was looking at, well, with our partners, the necessity to really ensure that we would bring gender mainstreaming to the forefront of activities that, or certainly it would be considered in the activities that we would engage upon with partners. Examples of this, Rolf Paye, our Executive Secretary, he's actually also a Geneva Gender Champion. And by participating in the it's now the International Gender Champions Network, he commits to quite a number of things, one of which is, for example, when he participates in panels, we have to ensure that there's gender parity. Those are the types of things that we're looking at doing when we engage with partners. Next, and this is really quite a big ticket item, which is integrating gender considerations in the implementation of the convention. Not as straightforward, although I do think that, you know, the benefit is that chemicals and waste, it's quite clear to see the impacts on different genders, different sexes brought about. Well, first of all, from a sex perspective, the biological standpoint, there's, you know, certain chemicals will have a greater impact on women, and also their gendered roles will put them in a position where they will be more likely to be impacted. So I think that we had a fairly clear path to see that this is a really important consideration when programming within the chemicals and waste agenda. It doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, overnight that became at the forefront, but we have undertaken numerous steps over the years to really try to bring gender as a key consideration in our work. So this slide really goes more into, you know, what our objectives were, and I've already touched upon these, but I mean, just to summarize, so we're looking at how to promote consideration of gender issues in this chemicals and waste agenda, make sure that our staff are up to speed with the different issues related to gender, make sure that all of our programmatic planning is done, bearing in mind gender equality, and then, of course, this important issue, which is quite closely linked to our human resources and administration, is ensuring a sustainable and balanced workplace staff. So here I'm just going to duck out of the gender action plan for a moment, but I will be coming back. But it was quite a milestone in the history of the conventions in 2017, where we had our first gender mainstreaming decision adopted by the three conferences of the parties. So you may be aware that certain decisions adopted at the three COPs are unique to each individual COP, and that's of course where the autonomy of the conventions come in. But there are joint issues that are considered across the three, and gender mainstreaming was one of those. So this decision was really important, first because, as you can see, it really invited parties to take action and to ensure that there was this equal involvement of men and women in the three conventions, and to ensure that there would be balanced representation in the participation in any of the processes associated with the conventions and in decision making. So that was quite an important invitation to parties. Next, the the conference has also welcomed the Gender Action Plan, which I've just I touched upon in earlier slides, and really gave us a firm mandate to implement that plan. Together with that, they asked us to develop some indicators so that with each successive COP, we can report on the progress in terms of implementation of the Gender Action Plan, which was also important. Next, so I'm coming back to the Gender Action Plan because really all of the activities we do within the Secretariat naturally falls under the Gender Action Plan. We've done quite a few activities in differing areas. We've done quite a lot of outreach on the issue. You can see here from the slide, we had our Gender Heroes publication. And I should mention that these are really timed to coincide with our COP meetings, which are every 2 years. We try to dedicate time within the COPs to discuss gender issues, whether it be through side events, launch events of these publications, award events, and so forth. And then, of course, as I mentioned, there was the discussion within the plenary setting with respect to the decision making on gender. But just to come back on these different activities, so we've had one main publication which really looked at individuals around the world, be it from governments, grassroots organization and things that they were doing to promote gender equality, mainstream gender. There's a really interesting collection of stories, and I hope you might take the time to look at our website and have a look. Also, the middle picture there, Amrita is one of our gender pioneers for a future detoxified. That was at the following COP. I think that was the 2017 COPs. We had awards. We ended up awarding 13 different gender pioneers who had taken extra special steps within their work to promote gender and mainstreaming. And again, they came from all across the full spectrum of stakeholder groups. So that was wonderful as well. The top right-hand corner, now this was very important. We had, working together with IUCN, we developed really a baseline from which we could move forward, looking at gender, was gathering statistics or data and statistics on gender within the BRS conventions. It was very quantitative in nature, but this was really a first step. And actually, I've had follow-up discussions with IUCN last week about our next steps in, now we have sort of the yardstick to measure progress by. But what the report that was issued in 2017 basically measured was looking at, participation of men and women in our COPs and subsidiary body meetings. That's where Anna has taken statistics from for the poll. Interestingly, it looked at, for example, under the Stockholm Convention, there's the requirement to complete a national implementation plan. They looked at how women were perceived within national implementation plans. And if memory serves me correctly, sorry, I'm reaching back now, it was mostly women are viewed as a vulnerable group within these national implementation plans. I think it was something like 2%, within 2% of the plans, women were viewed as agents of change. So it really shone the light on the fact that there really is a lot of work to do, even though the participation in the meetings is quite encouraging and becoming more balanced. The actual, view of women participating in issues and as decision makers is perhaps not as robust. And then in the bottom right corner, you'll see it's actually a screenshot of a video that we produced together with Women Engage for a Common Future. This is from a case study that was done or two case studies really, in Indonesia and Nigeria, looking at national perspectives in terms of gender mainstreaming, what actions have been taken at the national level. We also engage with local NGOs within both countries And that was very interesting. I also encourage you to look into that video. It really has some very interesting case studies, really, of how gender is considered in those national contexts. We're still finalizing 2 other case studies in Bolivia and Kyrgyzstan, and they will be coming out on our website shortly. So next this is actually a slide taken from our training program that we have on gender. This is another big area of work that we've been doing. What started out as specifically tailored gender training. So we started, I think it was maybe in 2017, with a sort of a tailored 1 or 2 day training program on gender. We started with our regional regional center directors. And then after that, we rolled it out. But what we did was we really tried any planned technical assistance activities under the 3 conventions. We'd really embed the gender training within that. So we'd take half the day of those already planned activities and haven't introduced the gender modules, which we found really effective. And we've managed now to do training on gender mainstreaming in all of the regions. Also helped prior to our last COPs in 2019, as part of the regional preparatory meetings that we did, we also introduced a half day of gender training in each of those. So that was really good. So this slide actually just is really kind of the one of the final slides within the training, which really points towards some of the main action areas that within the chemicals and waste sphere that, you know, we're trying to communicate with stakeholders. I won't go through them all, but they're there, and I think you'll get a copy of this presentation if you wish to look further. We also have our training package on our website as well for download, and that I should mention that is actually also being updated, so that's quite exciting. My last slide, which is Anna had said to me, you know what, it's really important right now, SciComm and Beyond 2020, and considering, you know, steps that will be taken in the future, how we can mainstream gender into those processes, and what would be important to think of as SciComm stakeholders moving forward. And that's really what I tried to do in developing this slide. I've identified 8 main areas for action. This is by no means, you know, completely, it doesn't cover everything, I'm sure, but I found, and together with my colleagues, that these are important areas to start with. First of all, developing an overarching gender framework or action plan. As I mentioned, we developed ours back in 2012. Of course, specific indicators by which you can measure progress is also very much needed. And it goes without saying that you need to revisit the action plan fairly frequently to update as needed. The second point was, for us, the primary stakeholder endorsement was key. Not only to have a firm mandate from our COPs, I mean, that's how the Secretariat carries out its work. It's mandated to do, you know, it's mandated by the parties. So that endorsement was key. Also, it really opened the door to donors to come and fund specific gender activities under the conventions. Next, and we found this actually in the training that we did, the importance of developing gender mainstreaming guidance within the project management cycle. There's an activity that we do as part of our training, which looks at all the different stages of the project cycle. And we try and we encourage the participants to think of, you know, what would be the considerations in terms of gender at, you know, your design phase or your monitoring or evaluation phase. So I think, you know, there are tools out there that can be used, but certainly this is something that we're thinking might be useful within our Secretariat to look at developing in the future. Next, embedding gender considerations in emerging policy issues. Well, speaking from the BRS standpoint, I mean, Yaya already mentioned in the chat about, you know, this Basel Convention plastic waste partnership, and we're now looking at really bringing gender issues to the fore through what is essentially now a more prominent issue in the convention, particularly the Basel Convention, kind of piggybacking on that issue in a way, to really make sure gender issues are brought to the fore. An example of this is, for example, technical guidelines under the convention have been developed over the past 30 years. None of them have consideration of gender or gender mainstreaming top sections, or there's really no mention. Whereas now we have the opportunity, the technical guidelines on plastics, for example, are being negotiated, that we can bring in, you know, gender points. Next, integrate gender training models into your capacity building activities. I think I've already explained about that. That was a really good model for us. The baseline of the disaggregated data, again, very important for measurement of progress. I'm sorry, I'm just going to race through these last ones because I've just seen the time and we need to allow some time for question. The seventh point, of course, increasing leadership opportunities for women. This goes without saying. And facilitating participation in decision making. I mean, you know, as a secretariat, we're a bit constrained as to what we can do. We can't reach into national governments, of course, and change the way things work there. But certainly when we're planning our meetings and we have negotiating groups, contact groups, we really strive to ensure that there's balanced representation, not only geographically, but gender-wise as well. And then communicating with impact. And I think, you know, this is the way to reach people. And we found it very useful to develop specific publications, participate in events like this, awards and so forth. And we're constantly thinking of new ways to communicate with our parties and other stakeholders. And then at the end of my presentation, I've just put a few reference points here, but actually I've got many more, so please feel free to contact me if you'd like more homework on gender, because I've got quite a lot of references I can provide to you, and there is my email. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I may have gone a bit over time.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you, and thank you. Thanks very much for this very interesting presentation and providing the detail, but also really thinking about, you know, what is it that we could pick up in the Psych and Beyond 2020 process, and what has worked for you. I see that the gender focal point and the gender team in BRS has certainly been more than active. And I've noted with interest that when you started, that there was also work being done on work-life balance in the Secretariat. And the longer I was listening, I was thinking, okay, you know, how does that sit? All the stuff that you actually been doing and updating and implementing vis-a-vis the fact that you also have a life. So that's something, anyway, that went through the back of my mind. But I'd like to open it for questions and comments from you all. I'm sure you might have questions to Susan. And let's take advantage of the fact that she's here and speaks from experience within those secretariats, within this secretariat for these 3 conventions. I apologize. If there aren't any questions right now, I'm going to have some, but let's see. You can raise your hands when you use the participant bit, or indicate, please, in the chat if you do have a question. If I may, I'm just going to jump in, and that's maybe a small one, but you mentioned something that I'm interested in, and that's, you said Rolf Payet was the Geneva Gender Champion, and you mentioned an International Gender Champions Network. I just want, if you can give us 2 sentences about that, who's a member, and how do we get them to come to ICCM5, or how do we maybe engage them?
Thanks, Minu. It's a great question. And well, the Gender Champions Network actually started in Geneva, and it's since been broadened to, I think it now encompasses Geneva, New York, Nairobi, and Bangkok. I hope I'm not missing out. I apologize if I am. And really, it's a chance to bring together leaders in, across different networks, not just environmental, of course, across all the UN system and beyond, to really take a pledge of thoughts to be leaders in terms of gender equality and gender mainstreaming within their organizations. And it's very interesting. I do suggest that you look at the IGC website. They're constantly planning different activities. I mean, of course, many are virtual, which actually is quite handy for now, because we're all working virtually for the most part. But it's just bringing together a network of decision makers to really commit towards equality in their respective organizations and work.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking if people have questions or comments. Don't be shy. I guess they might be shy because it looks like we're running out of time, but we can, if Susan, if it's okay with you, we can continue another few minutes, maybe.
Sure, of course.
Go a little over. Okay, thank you. Thanks. Otherwise, I would have just another one, if I may.
Of course.
And that's about governments, because I was wondering, with the whole range of activities you have there and the decisions at the COPs, are there specific governments who've been championing this? And would you be able to share from the top of your head who that's been?
Absolutely. I think from just in terms of our program, we really have relied heavily on Sweden, and also Germany have been very supportive of the gender activity. It doesn't mean that there aren't other donors out there who are very supportive of the work, but those are two that have been very supportive of our work. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks. So we're always looking for more who might be, even beyond the kind of usual suspects.
Sure, but even beyond donors, of course, the work that we've done on the case studies involving Indonesia, Nigeria, Bolivia, and Kyrgyzstan, they've committed a lot of their time and in-kind contributions, which we'd also like to recognize, because that really is invaluable. To the work. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, there might also be, we were thinking about or discussing internally, kind of to maybe put together a group of gender champions within the SciChem process, or friends of gender, something like that. Have you had something like that?
Yeah, I mean, this is what we were seeking to achieve with the Gender Pioneers Network. And really that is the idea. We had hoped that we would sort of engage the network more on more tangible activities, which we haven't done so yet. But it's like everything, it's a work in progress. But I do like the idea. I think it was the UNFCCC, they have the gender focal points within governments, right? So that's a really interesting idea. I think we have a lot to learn from CBD, certainly, and UNFCCC. So but these are things that have worked for us so far within the resourcing that we've had.
Yeah. Thanks. Let's take one more. Yeah, you have your hand up. Go ahead. Are you unmuted? No.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Before I ask my question, I would like us also to remember one lady who really made progress on gender issues, and she's hardly mentioned when we talk about these things. Before SciChem, there was the IFCS, the Intergovernmental Forum on Chemical Safety, and this was led by a lady, Judy Stauber from WHO. She really made a lot of progress for women just by the mere fact that she was leading the chemical agenda. So sometimes we should also consider her as a champion. But my question is, in the technical committees of the conventions, like the POPROC and other technical committees, what is the composition of women in these technical committees and ad hoc working groups?
Thank you. Do you know from the top of your head, Susan?
Well, it's a tricky one. No, I mean, we could expand technical committee to include any subsidiary body that we have, really. And I mean, for the open-ended working group, which is the technical group under Basel, we're pretty much the same level as COPS. In terms of sitting members of CRC, or the Chemical Review Committee under Rotterdam, and under the POP Review Committee, we're not quite at parity, and I think maybe Yaya has picked up on that. Although we've certainly tried. Again, it's a tricky one, because we do at every COP encourage parties, or invite them to consider gender parity, or to consider gender balance when nominating officers to each of these committees. But beyond that, we don't have so much say as to who, to what that composition looks like. But we certainly, I think if you also look at our website, you'll see that things are getting a bit better, but there is definitely still work to be done in that area.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Susan. Looking at the clock, I think we're going to be closing in a second. But I'd like to thank you once again, Susan, for this excellent presentation and sharing your experiences and your ideas and recommendations. Hope to be in touch. We will certainly make the recording available, as well as your presentation that also has the links. And everybody, please take her invitation seriously, and contact Susan if you want to be in touch and discuss things and have more that you would like to know from her. I'm handing over to Anna for an outlook for next week, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you all very much for joining us today. And if you have any further questions, check our website or contact us individually. And yeah, please join us next time, next week, with our webinar 4, where we want to discuss green and sustainable chemistry from a gender perspective. And that's really new, and I'm very excited about that. And additionally, we want to invite you to have a look at our blog article series on our website, because in the following days, we will upload a new article on the issue of gender, cosmetics, and chemicals, with a special focus on bleaching products, written by our intern, Pia. Yeah, so thank you all so much, and I wish you a very nice afternoon. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks, bye. And thanks again, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Good luck with the move.
Thanks so much.